All right, buckle up because we are diving into some seriously unique territory today. You provided this wild Adam's birthday book analysis for January 17th and well, let's just say I have a lot of questions. We're talking personality traits, strengths, weaknesses, maybe even a peek into someone's destiny, and it's all based on their birthday. So, is this source spookily accurate, hilariously off base, or a little bit of both? Only one way to find out, right? Let's unpack this thing and see what kind of picture Adam paints for all those January 17th folks out there. And of course, I'm joined by our expert guide to all things fascinating and maybe just a little bit strange.
Ready to decode some birthdays when you are...
Adam doesn't waste any time, does he? He jumps right in and calls January 17th the day of the heavyweight. And I have to admit, that stopped me in my tracks for a minute. So what are we talking about here? Physical strength? Or is this something a little more metaphorical?
Definitely more metaphorical.
Yeah.
When Adam says heavyweight, he's talking about a personality driven by ambition, a really strong sense of purpose, and a very direct way of approaching life. Think less about physical strength and more about having a powerful presence, a clear vision of what they want.
A personality with some real weight behind it, metaphorically speaking, of course. But then Adam throws in this curveball. He suggests that some people born on January 17th, maybe the less developed ones, might resort to manipulation to get what they want. That's a bold statement. What do you make of that? Is that a common pitfall, even outside the world of birthday analysis?
It's an interesting point, and honestly, it's not completely out there when you really think about it. Ambition can be a double-edged sword, especially if it's not kept in check. History is full of examples, right? People who achieve incredible things, but maybe they weren't always playing by the rules. Think of certain leaders, even characters in movies and books who have that drive, but also this ruthlessness.
Makes you think twice about that fine line between ambition and, well, just taking things too far. So how does this heavyweight personality actually show up in everyday life, according to Adam?
He gets into some very specific strengths he associates with this birthday. For one, he thinks people born on January 17th are really, really good at understanding what motivates other people, what makes them tick, and they're also incredibly self-disciplined, which he sees as a major factor in their success.
So they know what they want, and they have the discipline to make it happen.
Exactly. And on top of that, Adam describes them as having this natural, commanding presence. They just kind of draw attention wherever they go.
Not exactly shrinking violets, then.
Not at all. And the last big trait he points out is their individualism. Their really strong sense of self, they really value personal achievements, and they tend to be big proponents of individual rights.
I'm starting to see why he went with heavyweight. It really captures this idea of a personality that's both driven and maybe a little imposing, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a fair assessment, but it's important to remember every strength has its flip side. Like we were talking about earlier, understanding what makes people tick, that's powerful, but it can be used for good or for manipulation. Same thing with self-discipline. It's essential, but too much of it can lead to rigidity.
Right. Finding that balance is key.
Absolutely. And even that commanding presence we talked about, it can be inspiring, but it can also be intimidating. It all depends on how it's used. Some leaders inspire and unite with their presence. Others use it to control or even instill fear.
And what about that strong sense of individualism? Could that make collaboration a challenge for them?
It definitely could. Part of navigating that heavyweight personality is figuring out when to take charge, when to work with others, and when to step back and let someone else shine. It's a delicate dance.
It's like they have all the ingredients for success, but the recipe can turn out very differently depending on how they use those ingredients.
That's a great analogy. It really speaks to how complex personality is, right? Even a label like heavyweight, it can manifest in so many different ways.
It reminds us not to put too much stock in any one label. We're all way more nuanced than any single word or phrase could ever capture.
Absolutely. But I have to say, Adam doesn't stop at personality traits. He actually connects this heavyweight archetype to some really specific health advice.
That's what I love about this show. You never know what unexpected turn a deep dive will take. But we are going to have to take a quick break. Don't worry, we'll be right back to find out what kind of health advice Adam has in store for all our January 17th friends out there.
So where were we? Yes, Adam's health advice. And he really gets specific here, like oddly specific. He seems to think this whole heavyweight personality might be prone to get this pent-up aggression.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first read that, I definitely pictured a bunch of January 17th folks taking up kickboxing. But I'm guessing there's a little more to it than that, right? What's Adam getting at here?
You're right. It's not about any one activity, but the idea behind it is kind of fascinating. Think about it. If someone tends to bottle up their emotions, especially something intense like aggression, Finding a healthy way to release that energy, it makes sense, doesn't it?
So maybe Adam's onto something with this connection between this personality type and physical activity,
Mm-hmm.
especially something that allows for that release of energy.
It's definitely worth considering. It all ties into that mind-body connection, doesn't it?
Right, our emotional well-being and our physical well-being, they're intertwined.
Exactly. And speaking of connections, Adam takes this in another direction. He brings in numerology, linking the number 8, 1 back 7, 17, and planet Saturn to this whole January 17th thing.
I have to be honest, that's the part where I started to raise an eyebrow.
Mm.
Is there any real meaning behind those connections, or are we in fun fact territory here?
Well, numerology has been around for ages, and while it's not exactly scientific, it can offer some interesting perspectives. In numerology, the number 8 is often associated with balance, power, achievement.
And those themes definitely track with this whole heavyweight idea we've been unpacking.
Right. And then there's Saturn, which is often linked to discipline, restriction, even things like karma. You could see it as representing those challenges, those lessons in self-control that January 17th individuals might encounter.
It's like all these puzzle pieces are starting to come together, forming a bigger picture. And while we're on the topic of cosmic connections, Adam throws in another element, tarot. He specifically mentions the star card as being connected to January 17th. What's your take on that? I have to admit, tarot's not exactly my area of expertise.
Well, the star card in tarot is usually a symbol of hope, renewal, a connection to something bigger than yourself. It often shows up in a reading after a period of difficulty, signifying a return to peace, to a sense of purpose.
You know, that's interesting because it suggests a certain depth to this heavyweight personality we've been discussing. They might have their ambitions, their drive, but there's also this potential for introspection, for searching for a deeper meaning.
Exactly. And when we consider those potential pitfalls we talked about earlier, the unchecked ambition, the possibility of manipulation, the star card could be seen as this reminder of how important it is to find that balance.
It's like the card is nudging them to connect with their higher selves, to balance their earthly goals with a sense of purpose that goes beyond just personal achievement.
It's a powerful interpretation, isn't it? And even if we don't personally subscribe to every little detail of numerology or tarot, these connections can spark our curiosity. They can open us up to new ways of thinking about personality, about destiny, about what it all means.
I'm all for that, approaching these unconventional ideas with an open mind,
Right.
being willing to consider different perspectives, even if they seem a little out there at first glance.
Exactly. It's about asking those what-if questions and seeing where they lead us.
And sometimes, those unexpected paths lead to the most interesting discoveries. We've covered a lot of ground today, from heavyweights and their strengths, to numerology, tarot, even health advice. It's been quite the deep dive. But before we get too lost in the cosmos, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and while I'd never tell anyone to take a personality profile as gospel truth, I do think there's value in exploring these different lenses, these different ways of understanding ourselves and the people around us.
So you're saying there's more to this birthday analysis than meets the eye. Is it just harmless fun, or is there real food for thought here?
I think there's definitely food for thought, even if we approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism. It makes you wonder, what if there is something to these connections, even a little something? What if our birth date does hold some clues about who we are, what we're good at, the challenges we might face, even our purpose?
It really makes you think. And maybe it changes how we see people, even just a little. Maybe we pay a bit more attention to those January 17th folks in our lives, see if those heavyweight traits ring true.
Right. Like you said, it's all about approaching these unconventional sources with an open mind, being willing to consider those alternative perspectives, even if they seem a little out there at first.
And who knows, maybe we discover something new about ourselves along the way.
Exactly.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of Adam's birthday book and its take on those born on January 17th. A huge thank you to you, our listener, for sending in this fascinating source material.
It was quite the ride.
It really was. And for everyone listening, until next time, keep those minds open. Keep asking those what-if questions. And most importantly, keep those sources coming. You never know what hidden gems will unearth together.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.